That morning, the atmosphere in Charity Hospital was filled with noise and bustle. The loudspeakers continuously called the names of patients waiting for their turn, but no one seemed to notice the elderly woman standing in a hidden corner of the main lobby. She was wearing an old, worn-out outfit that had faded with time, paired with a pair of sandals with worn-out soles, making her appear like a ghost in the rush of people. Everyone around her was absorbed in their own tasks, patients, their families, and hospital staff, rushing and busy. No one paid attention to the frail, exhausted figure of the elderly woman. Her eyes, filled with longing, scanned the crowd in a desperate attempt to find help, but no one stopped. Slowly, she made her way toward the reception desk. Her feet trembled as she took tiny steps, her bony, withered hands gripping tightly, as if trying to keep herself from falling. The people around her didn't even acknowledge her presence. Only the hurried footsteps and the loud chatter of others filled the air, making the space feel congested and cold. When she reached the reception desk, she softly spoke, her voice weak and tired, but full of yearning. "Excuse me, could I borrow a phone to call home? My granddaughter doesn't know what to do, and I can't reach her." The receptionist, who had been intently staring at her computer screen, was momentarily startled by the request. She glanced up, briefly scanning the elderly woman, then quickly returned to her work. Despite the elderly woman standing directly in front of her, the receptionist's gaze was cold and indifferent. Her eyes lingered on the old, worn clothes and frail hands, but showed no empathy. Without hesitation, the receptionist curtly responded, "This isn't a place to borrow a phone. If you want to make a call, go outside and find another place. I'm busy." The words hit like an invisible knife to the elderly woman's heart. The receptionist's tone was cold and lacking any trace of compassion. The woman stood there for a moment, stunned. The surrounding onlookers started to notice her, but their attention wasn't out of concern. It was out of curiosity and irritation. Whispers began to circulate. "Who is this old woman? She looks like a beggar. Doesn't she have a phone? Why is she in the hospital? Probably just begging for something." The air seemed to thicken as the people around her failed to see beyond her poor appearance. They treated her as if she were unworthy of help. The elderly woman heard the whispered remarks, and her eyes filled with disappointment. Yet, she said nothing. She simply stood there, silent, bowing her head to hide the pain inside. Slowly, she backed away from the reception desk and found an empty spot on a bench in the waiting area, away from most people's view. She sat there alone, like a fading shadow amid the busy crowd. Her bony hands still gripped the hem of her clothes, and her dull eyes stared ahead, without focus, as if searching for something, anything. She didn't speak a word. She didn't blame anyone. Life continued for those around her, oblivious to her presence. Some even snickered, unaware that beneath her worn clothes and wrinkled hands was a human being, a life, a story, and a heart full of unspoken thoughts. Meanwhile, the elderly woman remained still, her eyes blankly staring out the window, as though waiting for something. The noise around her, the announcements calling patients' names, the chatter of the crowd, no longer caught her attention. Her mind was consumed with thoughts about her granddaughter, the things she had yet to say, the messages she wanted to share. Suddenly, from the silence, a mocking laugh broke out behind her. A middle-aged man, dressed in a fancy coat, walked past her and stopped for a moment. He glanced at her with disdain, then loudly said, "I really don't understand how this woman doesn't have a phone. A phone is the most basic thing everyone should have, and yet she has to ask to borrow one here?" His laughter echoed, laced with contempt, as if mocking the elderly woman. A few people nearby laughed along, not understanding the depth of their ignorance. They didn't realize that this elderly woman was living the last years of her life with little support, barely surviving without the help she so desperately needed. A few minutes later, a young, well-dressed woman, holding a brand new phone, walked toward the bench. She looked at the elderly woman from head to toe. With a scowl on her face, she slowly approached, speaking in a tone of quiet mockery, almost as if talking to herself. How could she possibly be lost? She's just trying to borrow a phone for some trick. Who would believe her? Her words were more than just mockery. They revealed a deep lack of compassion. Neither the man nor the woman saw the truth, that the elderly lady was not a scammer. She wasn't pretending to be weak. She was genuinely trying to contact her loved ones, feeling lost and alone. The old woman sat there, silently enduring, not resisting or blaming anyone, but in her heart, she felt the pain of abandonment. The harshest wound wasn't the mockery, but the feeling of being disregarded, of no longer having any worth. She knew society no longer cared for her, but she couldn't understand why even ordinary people could be so indifferent, even when she was just a person in need of help. After a while, the old woman bowed her head, struggling to hold back tears. She didn't want to appear weak to those around her. She had lived her entire life without showing her pain, but today, it felt as though the strength she had built over the years was running out. At that moment, a security guard walked by. He glanced at the old woman sitting there, but instead of helping, he gave her a suspicious look. After a brief pause, he approached and asked, "What are you doing here? Anything wrong?" His voice carried no concern. The elderly lady lifted her tired eyes, her voice barely audible. "Sir, I just need to borrow a phone to call my grandchild. I've lost her." Her words hung in the air, soft but pleading. Yet the guard only looked at her with impatience. He frowned, sighed, and replied quickly, "We don't have phones to lend here. This isn't a place for nonsense. Go somewhere else." His words were like invisible daggers, piercing her heart. The old woman remained silent, her head lowered in quiet defeat. Disappointment filled her eyes, and no one could see the suffering within. No one understood that her pain was not physical, but emotional. The deep wound caused by the coldness and indifference of others. She sat there, alone in the cold room, ignored and abandoned. She could still feel the chill of the people around her, but she no longer had the strength to face them. A small glimmer of hope for kindness had slowly faded within her, leaving her feeling empty. But then, something miraculous happened. A 12-year-old boy, holding a bag of food, entered with his mother. Unlike others, he wasn't in a hurry, nor was he absorbed in his phone or personal concerns. The boy walked up to the elderly woman, his gaze filled with genuine care and sympathy. It was a look of understanding, something not everyone had. He gently whispered to his mother, "Mom, that lady looks so sad. Should we see if she needs anything?" His mother hesitated, noticing the elderly woman. But when she saw the compassion in her son's eyes, she smiled. She understood that her son wanted to do something kind, and she couldn't refuse. She nodded, and together they approached the elderly woman. "Excuse me, ma'am, can we help you? Is there anything we can do?" The mother asked, her voice gentle and sincere. The old woman looked up, and for a fleeting moment her eyes brightened, as though she had seen a ray of light in the darkness. She smiled weakly, her trembling hands reaching out. "Thank you, dear. I just need to borrow a phone to call my grandchild." Without a second thought, the mother handed her phone to the elderly lady. In that moment, The old woman realized that kindness and compassion still existed, even in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. She grasped the phone, her hands shaking. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Thank you, dear. Thank you so much." With trembling fingers, she dialed her grandchild's number. As the phone rang, she could hardly contain her emotions. This wasn't just a phone call to her grandchild. It was a call from the depths of her heart. A grandmother eagerly awaits a call, longing to be reunited with her family. She cannot hide the joy in her eyes. Her gaze lights up as she hears a voice on the other end of the line. "Hello, it's me. I'm at the hospital. Can you come pick me up?" In that brief moment, her heart swells with happiness. It is a moment of realization. Despite the world often seeming indifferent, there are still people who see the value in kindness and compassion, like the young boy and his mother. The boy stands beside her, his innocent eyes full of empathy. He doesn't fully understand life, but one thing is clear. Kindness doesn't need a reason. It doesn't require a special relationship. It only needs a heart that can feel and share. In that moment, the boy learns an invaluable lesson about kindness, compassion, and love. Immediately after the grandmother makes the call, the atmosphere in the hospital changes. A sleek black car swiftly turns down the busy street and parks in front of the hospital. The screeching of brakes draws the attention of everyone around. Curious eyes fixate on the car. The door opens, and a middle-aged man steps out. He's dressed in a sharp black suit, polished shoes glistening. His dignified stride instantly tells everyone he holds an esteemed position in society. His face reflects worry, and his eyes scan the hospital lobby as though searching for someone. Behind him, two assistants carry stacks of documents and bags, rushing to keep up, further adding to the spectacle. The man stops when he spots the grandmother, quietly sitting on a bench. In that instant, he rushes towards her, his face full of emotion and concern. "Mom, why are you here alone? I've been looking for you all morning." Everyone in the lobby goes silent. They cannot believe their eyes. The powerful, well-dressed man is frantically searching for the elderly woman. The story takes a dramatic turn. The grandmother remains calm, but a faint smile plays at the corners of her lips. "I just came for a checkup," she says softly. "But I didn't know how to make a call. They wouldn't let me use the phone." The man's face shifts from worry to frustration. He looks around at the crowd with piercing eyes, full of indignation. "Nobody let her use the phone? My mother only asked for one call, and no one helped her? Why?" The silence in the hospital lobby grows heavier. The crowd is stunned, unsure of how to react. A few people lower their heads, unable to meet his gaze. The receptionist, who had refused the grandmother's request, is now pale and speechless. The man continues, his voice full of anger. "My mother has spent her life helping the poor. She founded the largest charity fund in the country. She helped build this hospital and has aided thousands of people. And today, my mother is treated like this." His words hang in the air, causing a tense silence. Those who had mocked the grandmother now lower their heads in shame. They realize that she is not a homeless person or a fraud. She is a woman of kindness who has given so much to society. The grandmother, still smiling gently, doesn't say anything more. She doesn't blame anyone. She simply tells her son in a calm voice, "Don't be angry with them, my dear. I'm old. I don't have the energy to hold grudges. I just wish they understood that sometimes helping someone doesn't require knowing who they are. It's just about sharing kindness. It's something I've always taught you, remember?" Her soft words, free of reproach or anger, carry a message of love and forgiveness. She has not only taught her son, but also offered a valuable lesson to everyone present. That kindness and helping others shouldn't be based on wealth, status, or familiarity. It's a virtue all of us should cherish and practice. As the grandmother and her son prepare to leave, no one dares to look up. They stand frozen, deeply moved. The story of the grandmother, though painful and harsh, has changed them forever, especially the receptionist, who had been cold towards the elderly woman. She stands there, her lips trembling, unable to speak. She couldn't find the words to apologize, but her eyes were filled with regret. That look said everything. She didn't need to say the words, because she understood something profound. The lessons the elderly woman had taught her weren't through words, but through her actions. In that very moment, a young man who had previously filmed the elderly woman being rejected walked toward her. He bowed his head and said, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have laughed at you. I was wrong." His apology was sincere, not just for her, but for himself. He realized that sometimes our thoughtlessness can hurt others without us even realizing it. But what mattered most was recognizing our mistakes and correcting them, so we could live better and kinder lives. At that moment, a woman, a receptionist, couldn't hold back her emotions. She burst into tears and walked over to the elderly woman, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were, but now I understand. I'm sorry for how badly I treated you." The elderly woman, like a loving mother, looked at the young woman with eyes full of compassion. She gently placed her hand on the receptionist's shoulder and said, "It's okay, child. Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is you recognize it and try to correct it. I don't hold any anger against you." Her words were an expression of deep forgiveness. She didn't scold or show bitterness, only hope that through her own mistakes, others might learn the value of kindness and compassion, which we all need to share with each other in life. After the elderly woman and the young man left, the atmosphere in the hospital seemed to change. Those around them couldn't forget the image of the elderly woman, frail, but still carrying an open heart, with no trace of anger or resentment. A few hospital staff began to reflect on their own actions. They asked themselves, do they have enough compassion and understanding to treat others, like the elderly woman, with kindness? Her story didn't end with the receptionist's apology. It planted the seed of awakening in everyone's heart. From that moment, many people in the hospital, from doctors and nurses to security staff, began to change the way they viewed others. They no longer focused on wealth or appearance, but on respect, compassion, and understanding. Just 1 week later, in the same hospital lobby, the receptionist who had apologized was seen smiling and welcoming elderly patients. She didn't just help them with care, she proactively engaged with them, asking how they were doing, creating a warm, friendly space for everyone. She had learned an important lesson from the elderly woman, that kindness doesn't always have to be grand. Sometimes, it's the small, simple acts that bring great value. A young doctor, who had silently witnessed the elderly woman being humiliated, but never intervened, also started to participate in the hospital's charitable activities. He told his colleagues, "I don't want to just stand by anymore. It's time to act. We can't keep watching people who need help without doing anything." The young doctor realized that if he didn't act now, if he didn't change his attitude and approach, the elderly woman's story would forever remain just a sad memory. Her story spread beyond the hospital walls and became a topic of discussion in families, among friends, and within communities. People began to realize that compassion wasn't just a lofty concept, but something practical, that we could live out every day through our actions, words, and gestures. The elderly woman's story, despite the pain and sorrow it carried, became a message about forgiveness, compassion, and unconditional kindness. This was the most important lesson she wanted to leave for future generations. And because of her story, those who had once been indifferent, those who had mocked her, now learned to value and spread love and kindness to those around them. Dear viewers, this story is not just a lesson for the young, but also a reminder of the precious values that the elderly can pass on to the next generation. Here are the key takeaways from the story. 1. Forgiveness and compassion. Even when humiliated, the elderly woman didn't respond with anger, but chose forgiveness. She taught that kindness keeps peace in our hearts. 2. Kindness has no limits. Despite being frail and poor, the elderly woman continued to help others, showing that age is not an obstacle to living a meaningful life. 3. Empathy and understanding. The story emphasizes that we shouldn't judge others based on appearances, but instead, we should seek to understand and empathize with them. 4. Compassion in community. Kindness helps to connect generations and builds a loving, supportive community that enriches everyone's lives. The importance of family. Relationships between generations need care, respect, and attention, with younger people showing kindness to the elderly. 6. Teaching compassion. Elderly individuals can teach the values of compassion, kindness, and responsibility to the younger generation. Dear viewers, today's story is a reminder of the power of compassion, forgiveness, and empathy. Despite life's challenges, let us always treat one another with love and respect. When we live kindly, we not only help others, but also make our own lives more meaningful. Thank you for watching the Light of Life channel. Don't forget to spread these good values in your everyday life. We look forward to seeing you in the next video.